Good morning, we're learning as a chutz for Shlema, for Ilan Chaya Bas Serach. I'd also like to add Shira Bas Shalamis. I have a first cousin in Eretz Yisrael who's been learning there for the last about 40 years. And his daughter just got into a terrible car accident. It was really, it's like, I think she literally just had surgery last night. Yeah, I'm on the family email chat, so like we get updates. I just got an update like 2 minutes ago to remind me to have this in mind. So we're on Daf Hey Amid Beis by the parentheses Siman Hagash Basar, about 15 lines down from the top. Yosef Rav Huna Rav Nachum the Yosef Rav Shesh Gabai V'Yasvi Kamri. They were discussing Kasha Leila Rish Lakish Ashram Dali Atzil Acha Misa. Right, Rish Lakish had asked the question. Rish Lakish had asked a very basic question. On our Mishnah said that karbanis generally shaloi l'shma, if they're brought shaloi l'shem, the proper carbon, the din is that it's kosher. The carbon root, you continue bringing that carbon, but l'shem chayva. It's not miratza. It doesn't serve the purpose. The bailim still have to bring another one. That's essentially what it means. The Le'ol Bailam Shem Chayva has obviously is a lot of subtlety to that, but the basic taich of it is that the Bailam have to bring another one anyway. So he asks, and so so Rish Lakish asks, how could you have such a thing? What does that mean that it's kosher, but it's Le'ol Bailam Shem Chayva? If it's kosher, the Bailam shouldn't have to bring another one, and if it's not kosher, it shouldn't be kosher at all. You should stop the avodah. So we had said, no, we see such a thing, that there are carbonis that if someone set aside a carbon and then the person passed away, his yarshim bring the carbon, even though it's not being oil them l'shem chayv, they don't have a chayv. So you see such a thing that a carbon should be kosher, even though it's loyal l'bayil l'shem chayv. We asked, what about asham? Asham is a carbon it's brought for a chait. The Bailam are no longer here, and it's not brought la'achamisa. So therefore, it's not brought la'achamisa. What you do is it's yirach yistoev, and then you bring it as a oil l'kayetz hamizbeach, but it's not brought as a asham. Why is it that according to the Tanakama, an asham has a din of loy alu l'bayil, that it's kosher loy alu l'bayil l'shem chayva? It doesn't have that possibility of being brought la'achar misa. Good morning, we're on Hey Amid Beis, and we just reviewed the kasha. We're going back now to the kasha on Amid Aleph, right, where Rish Lakish had asked, how could there be such a thing as kasha v'le'olu b'alim shem chayva? And we said, so Rish Lakish wanted to say that it's asi la'achar misa. I'm sorry, Rabbi Elazar wanted to say that it's asi la'achar misa. So you find that karbanos are brought la'achar misa. So you have such a thing of kasha v'le'olu b'alim shem chayva. But then we asked, what is going to be the Rish Lakish asked, what about asham? You have an answer for me. For other karbanos, Rabbi Elazar, you have an answer. But I still have a problem with asham. Why an asham is not brought la'achar misa? So the Gemara asks, Lema le Rabbi Elazar, why doesn't Rabbi Elazar answer Rish Lakish? Asham nami also la'achar misa. Maybe an asham, in a certain sense, an asham is brought la'achar misa. That the din of a asham is that if the bailim are died, it's not that it goes lemisa like a chatas, but rather it's yirach yistav, it's put out to pasture, and then when it eventually gets a mum, you sell it and use that money to buy karbanis, to buy oilus l'kayetz hamizbeach. This concept of oilus l'kayetz hamizbeach, kayetz hamizbeach literally means as a dessert for the mizbeach. That at times when there's no carbon that's needed to be brought on the mizbeach, you bring these additional extra karbanis. So the asham gets converted into an oila by waiting until this ashram gets a mum, and then you bring it. So l'chayre, it is brought la'achar misa. After the owner dies, there is something that becomes of the carbon. Amal hu sheshes asam l'maykarav l'moisrei. So what are you trying to tell me? You're trying to tell me that asham, the reason why it's considered to have an ability to be brought as a carbon which is kosher, is because it's brought la'achar misa as an oila. Chatas nami mikkarva. There's a situation in which a chatas also can be brought, even though we said in our Mishnah that there's no such thing as a chatas that's kosher va'Allah ba'alam shem chayva. So, but nevertheless, there is such a thing that a chatas is brought la'achar misa. That, and Rashi explains the situation where somebody set aside a carbon chatas. He was makdish a carbon chatas, and then as a backup, he set aside a second carbon, a second animal to be the backup for that carbon chatas. But then what happened was he brought the first carbon, and now this second carbon is left to be Yirachi Yistoyev. It doesn't have a din like Chata Shemei Sabala. It's considered like a carbon that it's not. And even if the Bailam die, it's still not going to be a Chata Shemei Sabala because it wasn't really a full Chatas. It was just a backup Chatas. So it doesn't have the din. The Chata Shemei Sabala is Lamisa Azla. So you can have a Chatas that is left out to pasture and then it's sold, and its leftovers are used for L'kayetz HaMizbeach, just like we said by an Asham. But the Chatas, our Mishnah concluded, there's no such thing by a Chatas that it's going to be kosher va'ol b'ayim shem chayva. If the Chatas is shaloi l'shma, it's in ganz impossible. So you see, it can't be that it has this aspect that it's possible for the moisrus, for the leftovers, to be brought as a oil l'kayetz hamizbeach. That doesn't make it that it's considered to be oil b'alim shem chayva. I'm sorry, that's not oil b'alim shem chayva, but it's still brought. That's not the factor that makes it that it's kosher, even though it's oil b'alim shem chayva. Zok Gemara. Says Mechatas avagav the kavim meisus miet rachmanahu. Says no, the fact that you can't determine anything, you can't ask a kasha from the fact that a chatas brings moistus la'achamisa, because the Torah specifically said that even though it's theoretically possible for chatas to have a din that it's kosher, but the Torah said that chatas it must be l'shem l'shma, and if it's not l'shma, it's in ganz impossible. So the Torah, even though we have a good mechanism to say that it should work, even though it's kosher v'le'abalim shem chayva, but the Torah said not like that. The Torah said the chatas is excluded, that when it's l'shma, it's in ganz impossible. If that's the reason why, Asham nami ksiv behu, why don't we learn that from the hu that it says by Asham? It says, v'hiktir oisam ha'koyin ha'mizbecha ishel Hashem Ashamu. So let's say that means Asham also should be only if it's a Shema, but if it's not l'Shema, it's not just L'Yol B'Am Shem Chayva, but it should be possible altogether. So the Gemara, hu la'achar Torah emrum hu dichsiv. The Gemara says no, that hu is not the same as the hu by Chatas. When we say Chatas hu, it's talking about the Avodas Hadam, but this is talking about the procedure of the Karbanis, and I would recommend to everyone, over Rosh Hashanah, when you have spare time, if you have your art scroll with you, try to read once or twice. It's a very long summary at the beginning of Zevachim. It has the summary for the whole Kachim as well as the summary specifically for Zevachim. But if you look at the summary for Zevachim, it'll tell you the Seder Avodas. And the way it works is first you makdish the behema, then you bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, and you shecht it. You do the avodas hadam, shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika, and then after that, you makta the emurim. You bring those on the mizbeach. The emurim are the parts of the animal that are designated to be burnt on the mizbeach. Some by shlomim, for example. Other parts are eaten by the by the owners, some parts are eaten by the Kaihanim. An oila, the whole thing is burnt, ends up being, even what's not a murim, is burnt on the Mizbech. But in any case, by an Asham, you have Aktar say murim. So this pasuk is saying who? It's after Aktar say murim. Tichsid. Ketanya, avol Asham le'namba by who? El acha Aktar say murim. V'u'atzayim le'iktirei murim kosher. And the Aktar say murim is not even ma'akev. If you skip the Aktar say murim, the carbon is still kosher. So you can't say that the who is coming to tell you that it's going to be, the carbon's going to be puzzle if the who is going on a part of the avodah that itself is not ma'akev. So therefore, you don't have an equivalent who by Asham to explain why the fact that it's moisturous are eaten, after that, even though the moisturous are kosher, even though they're not alul b'ayil m'shem chayva. So by Asham, that will be the explanation. That should be the explanation of why Reish Lakish should have an answer. Rebbe Lazar should have an answer to Reish Lakish that really it should be possible to have something that's kosher v'le'olu b'alam shem chayva even by Asham. Zok the Gemara ve'lahu lamali. So we just said that the who that it says by Asham cannot be to override the din that even though it's olu b'alam shem chayva la'achamisa, because it's the who is not is going on a part of avodah that's not ma'akev. So what is that who doing there? What do we learn from it? It's coming to tell you din of Rav Huna Marav, Dam Rav Huna Marav, Asham shenitik l'riyah, b'shachto istam kosher. So we said, what's the din of a Asham that the Bailam died? We said it gets set aside, as it gets put out to pasture. We wait for it to get a mum, and then when it gets a mum, it's sold, and the money is used to buy a oila l'kayetz ha-mizbech. It's used to buy an oila as an extra dessert on the mizbech. So what happens, this was an asham, and now somehow it's becoming an oila. So the Gemara, what was saying is that the asham becomes a oila, its designation changes at the time that you put it out to pasture. When you hand it over to the roya, to the shepherd, and say, you watch this thing until it gets a mum, at that point, its designation, it's converted from what was an asham to being an oila. So Rav says, an asham that was already put into this position, was put out to pasture, and then the person shechted it he didn't wait for it to get a mum and to be sold, but rather he just shechted it without having anything in particular in mind. Kosher. It's kosher to be brought, if he brings it to the Beis HaMikdash and he shechts it there, it's kosher to be brought as an oila l'kayet HaMizbech. Mashma nitak in only after it was put out to pasture, loy nitak loy. But if it wasn't put out to pasture, it's not my timer. Amakra hu beviyasa yehe, because the Torah tells you it remains a asham until a concrete action is done where it's put out to pasture. That converts it from being a asham to being an oila. But just the fact that the Bailam died, that's not enough to convert it to from an asham to an oila, because the Torah says that it remains in its status until an action was taken. So we learned out this din of Rav from the word who. Yasvi Rav Nachman Rav Sheshes v'Yosef Rav Adva Masel Rav Yasvi Kami Hadika Amar Rav Elazar Matzinu B'Bayin La'Chamisu Shen Ksherin V'Ein Meratzim. So again, we're going back to that original discussion between Reish Lakish and Rav Elazar. The Reish Lakish had asked, how do you have such a thing that a carbon, that if it's brought shaloi l'shma, the carbon is still kosher, you continue with the rest of the avodah, but it's ein meratza, it doesn't help the bailim that they don't have to bring another one. And Rav Elazar had said back to him, no. Rav Elazar said that we find that there is such a thing that a carbon could be kosher, but it's not olu bailim shem chayva la'achar misa, that the Yarshim bring it in the place of the Bailim, even though they're not being yotze any mitzvah. They're not being yotze any obligation. They're not. It's not being all Bailam Shem Chayv. The Bailam are dead, and they're not the ones who need to bring a carbon. Leimale Reish Lakish. So why doesn't Reish Lakish answer to Rebbe Laza? Hanu nami lai sivilertzu. Maybe. Why can't Reish Lakish answer him? Why are you saying that the Yarshim don't get a kapara? Maybe it's being a ritzi for the Yarshim. Amal and Ravada Ramasna. The pasuk over there is talking about a Yeledis. Yeledis and he yolda baneh mi yoldu. How? Let's say that the Yarshim, the person who originally brought the carbon, was a Yeledis, a woman who gave birth, and she's mechayiv to bring a few karbanas. And we talked about if she brought the chatas, then you could still bring the oila. If she brought the oila, she can't bring the chatas because the chatas is not kosher, not all the bailam. It's puzzle and gansen. But the Gemara is asking, he's asking back to him, what are you saying that the Yarshim should get a kapara? They didn't give birth. How are they getting a kapara from their mothers giving birth? The Yarshim usually are men. They can't give birth. Maskal Arasi Uman Leimelon Diyika Kama Segaba Lai Miskabra. You're saying that the oila that she's bringing as a Yeledes, which is the oila to be mechaper. An oila is mechaper in general on essays. So if a woman who is Yeledes brings a carbon oila as a Yeledes, it's mechaper not just on the Yeledes brings. If you remember from Chumash in the Rashi in Chumash, explains because a woman makes shuas against her husband when she's in the pain of childbirth. So that's what she's mechaper on. But it's not just mechaper on that; it's also mechaper on any essays. Oilus, when someone brings the oilus, mechaper on it if he's mevatel an essay. So if she had any other essays, it's also going to be mevatel those. As we're going to see in the Gemara, a oila is different than a chatas in how it's mechaper. A chatas is only mechaper. Every time someone does an avera, he has to bring a separate chatas for each avera. But if someone is mevatel essays, all the essays that he was over on could be miskaper al yedei one oila. So the woman could be mechaper on a bunch of essays. But even the essay gaba mechaper, Yarshim not be mechaper. So the Yarshim also, if they have any essays, they could be mechaper. So why did Reish Lakish tell Rebbe Lazar, why are you assuming that the Yarshim cannot get a ritzui from this carbon that this oil they brought Shaloi Lishma? Maybe they can't get a ritzui. Are you saying that Yarshim, when they bring the father's carbon, the Yerushim, it's almost like a real Yerusha, and now they own the carbon? Because, like Rashi says, how you can't get a kapara from a carbon that's not your own. If Reuven brings an essay, an oila, it's not mechaper Shimon on his essays that he was mevatel. Ba'amar Rav Yochanan, and I'll bring you a riot. Hiniach mincha l'shnei banav. If someone left over a mincha to his two sons, a mincha is the flour offering that you bring, but a mincha has the unusual din, which you find in other things as well. We're going to find it by Tmura as well. That a mincha, the Torah says nefesh, that it says it says a b'lashon yachad, and mincha cannot be brought by two shutvin. So if someone left over a mincha to his two sons, umeis kreva, the ein boy shutvas, it can be brought, and there's no din of shutvas. If you hold that, if you're going to think that the Yarshim are kind of the carbon, and therefore they're able to get a kapara, they're able to be miratza, it's their carbon. But the Torah says nefesh, that you can only have one shutef. So if these two brothers yarshin it together, they'll be shutfin, and then it should be excluded from being brought as a mincha. Elamai must be that it still belongs to the father, and they're just being the shluchim to bring it on his behalf. And if that's the case, that slugs up Reish Lakish's proposed teretz that an asham can be brought on behalf of the Yarshim. In fact, the Rav Loikanilu is true. It's not kind of Amrav Yochanan. Hiniach behim l'shnei banav umeis kreva. If someone left over a carbon to his two sons, it's brought, like we said. But if they try to make a tmura from it, the Torah says that if you set aside a carbon, you're not allowed to replace that carbon with a second carbon. You can't say, I want to exchange it, be meimer it, do tmura of it with another carbon. And what happens then is that both of the karbanos are become possible. So if you'll say that they both own it, then we'll understand why there's no tmura on this carbon that they inherited from their father, because this is a behemoth that was hoktish for a carbon, and he died. So we're saying it can't be meimerit because, like we said before, there's no din of tmura on something that's owned b'shutfas. If Bailam owns something b'shutfas, one of them decides to be meimerit, it's ineffective. It doesn't do anything. The havaluka shutfin, and like we said, the shutfin loy matzu mamirim. There's a din that shutfin are not able to remember. Eli Amret like kanyaluhu emuri nami lenru. Why can't they make a tmura on it? If they're not kainet, it still belongs to the father. There's only one owner. Let them be meimer. So shani hasn't damakram hamer yamel l'rabes es hayirish. The Torah says by tmura, if someone's in hamer yam, if he's going to make it tmura out of it, it's going to have the din tmura. It's coming to include a yirish can also do tmura. Echad meimer vein shnai memir. But the pasuk says only one can be meimer, not two. So it's exeris hakosav. It doesn't have to do with them being kainet. The Torah was geyser that Yarshim, even though they're able to, the Irish can be maimer. He's able to bring the carbon, but doesn't have. They can't. Even though they're not technically shutfin, they're not real owners. But the Torah says only one can be maimer, not two. Even though they're not actually shutfin, they don't really own it. They're not kind of. Maskal Yaakov minap koid elamiata gabi meiser. The Torah says that there's certain dinim that apply specifically by Meiser Sheni, that the owner, if he's paid the Meiser Sheni in order to bring it to Yerushalayim, to bring the money to Yerushalayim, he has to, and then he sells, if he sells the behemoth to himself, he has to add on a fifth. So we say that also applies to his Yerush. But and then use the lashon and goal, you go rabbis a Yerush hachanami echad goyel and shnayim goyelim. But there's no such din. It's gonna, if we darshan that, since it's using a lashon yachid, when it says that a Yerush can do it, we said that legabi tmura, that it comes to say that two can't do tmura, so it should also mean that two are not going to have the din of the father to be paida the ma'aser sheni, to have the right to be paida the ma'aser sheni. So Gemara, no, that's not a good comparison. There's no problem with taking off Ma'aser Sheni, being the one who has the right to decide where Ma'aser Sheni should be paida. That there's nothing wrong with doing that b'shutvis. So therefore, when it says by the father, when it says a lashon yachid, it's not meaning to say that it can only be yachid and not b'shutvis. But by tmura, where there generally is the din that it can't be done b'shutvis, when we say a lashon yachid, that means to say, but shutfin, it's not going to apply. They're not going to be able to do tmura. Amalei Ravasi leRavashi, umina. Ravashi. Okay, so we said. So we said that a Yerush is able to do tmura even on something that he was Yerush. We learned it out from the pasuk of Imhamer Yom. Umina. We can learn from there our original question that Yarshim are kaina, which is the question that was which we had to know for the purposes of Rebbe Lazar's kasha on Reish Lakish. If you say Yerush is kaina hindu chad miya meimer, then we can understand why a Yerush can do tmura. Eli Amet like kanyalu hechi meimer. How can someone do tmura if he's not kaina? Hamakdish meisav chaynish. This is talking about, this Bryce is talking about different dinim that, I'm sorry, it's not a Bryce. These Amoraim said, different dinim that have to do with a person's ability to direct something that where he's not gaining anything. So Hamakdish meisav chaynish. Like we said before, when someone gives, we said Legabi Ma'aser Sheni, but it also applies to kachim, when someone gives something to hektish that then has to be paida, you're going to then sell it in order to take the money and give it to hektish. So if he sells it to himself, he has to be ma'asav chaimish. So that only applies to the person who is makdish, not to someone else. Someone else who is not the makdish. Let's say he was makdish. If someone was makdish an animal for someone, it's for someone else to get a kapara. The makdish is the one who has to be ma'asav chaimish, not the person on whose behalf he was makdish the animal. Muskaper oisa tmura, and also the person who's getting the kapara from the animal, right? Not the makdish, but rather, let's say if one person was makdish an animal on someone else's behalf, the one who's getting the kapara, he's the one who, if he exchanges it for another animal, makes it a tmura. But if the makdish were to do it, it wouldn't be effective. It wouldn't be considered tmura. Someone who, these are again different dinim where someone is doing something on someone else's behalf. If someone uses his own tvua to take truma from someone else's tvua, he gets the right to decide which kain it goes to and the benefits that come from that. But in any case, the middle thing we said, the miskaper is isa tmura. Only someone who gets a kapara is isa tmura. So it must be that the kanyalu, if they're not kainit, if the yarshim are not kainit, obviously they're not able to make a tmura. And for the Gemara, no. Mekiva loy mechapra, mikufya mechapra. So Rashi explains this lashon that kiva is a lashon of kavua. He's not going to get the full kavua de kapara. He's not going to get a full kapara. That means when he buys it, he's not takanat kainit in gansen. But mikufya mechapra, he gets like a floating type of kapara, a minimal, a de minimis kapara, or I shouldn't say de minimis, but a lesser kapara. So he gets a kapara enough that he's considered the owner that he can make a tmura, but he's not considered a full kapara that he's kained in gansen. Now the Gemara moves on to a different discussion. This is not now, we're not talking about Shaloi Lishma over here. We somehow moved over to a different topic. We have another 10 minutes, right? If all told you have to go to, I don't remember the time you said. Yeah? Ibaylu. Kifra shamasha bo oiloi kifru. We had brought up in our discussion that an oila is brought as a kapara for essay, if someone is over on an essay. So the question is, when someone brings the oila, it's not necessarily on a specific essay, it's on any essays that he's done before. So now the Gemara asks, I'm sorry. I skipped a little. We're not yet up to the question I'm talking about. First, we're asking a different question. We were still talking about Shaloi Lishma. Yibaylo, Kifra al Masha Bo Aloi Kifra. If someone brings a carbon Shaloi Lishma, we said that they have to bring another carbon. It's not Loi Alu Bal Hashem Chayva. But the Gemara is asking, does it provide a kapara on what they had, on the reason it was brought? Let's say they brought an oila for essays that they had done. Was it mechaper on those essays? Meaning, do they have to worry about getting punished in the meantime? I like kifru. Or does it not provide a kapara until they bring the second carbon that they're obligated to bring because it wasn't meratza? Are they still on the lurch? Are they still on the hook for the original Isser? Amr Sheish is very dev. Idim mistaver the loy kifru. L'chayra, doesn't provide a kapara. The Isak Adaitach kifru. If you say that the first carbon was already mechapa on whatever it was that the carbon needed to be brought for, sheini lamu ba. Why are you bringing the second one? We're saying the olu l'bayim shem chayva, and therefore he has to bring another one. But he already has a kapara, so why you bring a second? So Gemara, well, that doesn't make any sense. So you're saying that the first carbon is not kafir, lamalu karv. Why do you continue bringing? We're saying that it's a kosher carbon. You have to continue bringing it to the end. But if it's not doing anything, why are you bringing it? Amr Avashi, Rav Shisha Brei Dervidi, Haki Kakashale. He says, no, it was a different question. If you say that this original carbon does not provide a kapara, even though it's not providing kapara, but since it was originally brought lishma, so we continue bringing the carbon, since part of it was lishma, it makes sense that you should bring the whole carbon because of the part that was lishma. And the second one is bought lechaper. Eliyamet kifru sheni, Eliyamet kifru. But if you say the first one is mechaper, it had a little bit of lishma, and now it was mechaper on what he did. The sheni is no like that. It was first brought lishma, and then it got messed up. Why you bring it? You already had a kapara. It doesn't have that. It was partially brought lishma already. So the Gemara. So that's if there's no. The first one it was started to be brought, and it was brought partially lishma, so you have to fulfill it out. But the second one, once you have a kapara from the first one, he's asking, why would you bring it? So therefore, it's a raya that it must be that it's not mechaper on the on whatever it was intended to bring when he does it shalai lishma.
What's the problem with bringing a korban stam? I mean, we see the kites mizbeach would bring a korban. So why would this be any worse?
We're saying the owner is required to bring it. Here, we're saying he has to fulfill his obligation. But what obligation is there on him?
No, let's say it doesn't fulfill the obligation. It's not mechaper. Okay, so you have this.
Lechaper is like a loaded term. The point is, once you say I'm bringing an oila, you have to bring an oila. I say harei alai oila, even though he's not mechayiv to bring an oila. Once he made a neder that he's bringing an oila, if the animal were to die, he'd have to replace it with another. He can't say, "Oh, I changed my mind. I don't want to bring it." So he has an obligation to bring it once he's decided to bring it. But if the oila is brought, let's say an oila is brought to be mechaper on his essays, and he did it. The beginning was lishma. He was makdash at lishma, and was brought to his car to the Beis Hamikdash. And now the kohen had a machshava shaloi lishma. He thought it was a shlamim. So we're saying you have to finish doing the avodah of the carbon, but the bailim still have to bring another carbon. So we're asking what happens with his kaparas that he was supposed to get from this carbon. So we're saying if he was already yotza, that it was mechaper on him on whatever let's say on whatever essays he had done prior to being makdash. So what's the point of bringing a second carbon? You're saying it was loyal b'alam shem chayva, but it did do his chayva. It did satisfy his obligation. It was mechaper him on what he did. That's the Gemara's cheshbon. It's saying that, but on the other hand, if it's not mechaper on him, so now he has to bring a second oila because he still has his obligation to bring an oila. He had said he was bringing an oila to mechaper on these averis, whatever his reason is. He could just bring an oila as an edava, but it still works to be mechaper on his averis. So now he's when he brings the second oila, it's going to finally deal with those problems that were left over.
The other question becomes, what happens to the first oila if he has to bring a second one?
Well, we said he completes the avodah. He does.
The Kohen finishes the avodah.
Yeah, that's what it means. Kosher in the Mishnah means that he has to complete the avodah. And now, so we're asking, if he gets a kapara, then why would you bring the second one? What's the point of the second one? It's not fulfilling any function.
So Mashma that if he needs a second one, the first one does not give the
first
kapara.
One did not do what it was supposed to. Ibayalahu. I want to ask a question. Like we said, when someone brings an oila, he gets now we're moving away from shalai lishma. We said if someone brings an oila, it's mechaper on essays that he was mevatel. He didn't wear tzitzis. He wore something with arba canvas without tzitzis. He's mevatel mitzvah of tzitzis. Let's say he did that after he separated the animal, but before the carbon was brought. Certainly after the carbon is brought, he's not going to get a kapara for the future essays that he's mevatel. But what about between the time that he was mafresh the animal and when he brought the carbon? So the la'achar afrosh mechaper or loy mechaper? Mi'amina mida hava chatas. Do we say it's like a chatas? Ma chatas the kaid mafresh in the la'achar afrosh loy. If someone did a chatas, if he did a chait, he ate chaylev, and he separated a carbon, it's going to be mechaper. But if he separated carbon chatas before he had done anything, and then he ate chaylev by mistake, it's not going to work. Avachanami the kaid mafresh in la'achar afrosh loy. Or maybe you can say it's not similar to chatas. I'll call chait v'chait boy lesu yechad chatas. Every time a person eats chaylev, even if he does it 10 times, he eats chaylev 10 times in different forgettings, different shayging, and he brings 10 chatais. But if he did it with tzitzis together with his arba kanfus, even if he did it 10 times, he just brings one oila. Maybe it could also be mechaper on those essays that come after Afrasha. Toshma, I'll bring you right. Samach v'nirtza. Torah says he puts his hand on the animal. V'nirtza loy lechaper olav. So the roisha oila legabe oila v'nirtza loy lechaper olav. V'chi smicha mechaperes. What does it say? He's saimech and then he gets a kapara. V'lein kapara ela bedam. The kapara always comes. The rule always is that kapara comes when you do the zrikas adam. So what are we talking about? That he's going to get a kapara when he's saimech his hands. That the dam is what's mechaper. If someone skipped the smicha, he made it as an extra mitzvah, as if it's not necessary to do. The Torah treats it as if he was mechaper and he was not mechaper, or he was not mechaper and he was mechaper. So what does that mean? What's that? Hey, I'm sorry. There's a lot of emendations, a lot of girses. My keeper or my loy keeper. What does it mean? What does it mean? He was kilu keeper of a loy keeper. My loy keeper. Asa de kaidem afrosha. What is it not mechaper on? My lav. I'm sorry. The keeper. What is keeper? Asa de kaidem afrosha. That's talking about an essay that he did before he was mafresh, which is the typical din that when he separates the animal, it's mechaper, and he essays that he did before. Loy keeper, and what is loy keeper? Essay the smicha, the havale essay the lachar frosh. It's coming to tell you that he was mechoyev to do smicha. There's a mitzvah to say that you should do smicha on an oila, and he neglected to do that, and it's after hafrosh, and it's coming to tell you it's a twisting on itself. His carbon oila that he's bringing to be mechaper and essays, he was over an essay in the bringing of that carbon. And since that essay is la'achar hafrosh, it was after he separated the animal, he's not going to get a kapara for that new essay that he was mevatel. So l'chayr we see that an essay la'achar hafrosh is not going to get a kapara. Amar Ava, essay to smicha kam, but you ask from essay to smicha, shani also the hokama d'loy shachet ba'amay v'samach kai. It's not a bittul until he shechs the animal, and once he shechs the animal, that's when it's already too late to get a kapara. So since this bittul essay actually only first takes place after the animal is geshachtim, which is part of the avodas adam, so therefore it's not just after the hafrasha. It's really the bittul of the essay is first happening after the carbon was brought, and that l'kuliyam, everyone agrees that he's not going to get a kapara for essays after the carbon was brought. Zak Gemara, Amos kabahavi essay la'achashchita like kami boiling. It first becomes an essay after he does a shchita, and no one's questioning that you certainly can't get a kapara from an essay that a person commits after he shechted his carbon oila. So what does it mean? So what does that brisa mean? Amalei Rav Huna bar Yehuda l'Rava ema kipa gavra loy kipa kamishmaya. So what does it mean that he's keeper of a loy keeper? It means that it's mechaper for the person that he did, that whatever essays he did, it's mechaper on him. but he did not do klapi shmaya what he was supposed to. That since he didn't bring the smicha, he was supposed to be saimechet. The Torah said you should be saimechet, but it's not ma'akev, so didn't do what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants. Milay Tanan. Where do we see such a thing? We say that a person, when he becomes a mitzayra, as part of the, I think we have to stop here. I guess we're gonna have to go back on this a little bit. Okay.
Yes, correct.
Is there
Tomorrow?
anyone that